Hello, you have. Yes, I was vaguely aware that it was Yom Kippur. I know your fasting starts today and it ends tomorrow, 25 hours later. And Yom Kippur is the um, Hebrew word for the Day of Atonement. And in the definition of atonement, there includes obviously error, remorse, and the desire to be forgiven. But actually, I was thinking of Mrs. Charlie Kirk. Curiously, another contact of mine emailed me to discuss um, the question of forgiveness, and we know that Mrs. Kirk's forgiving Tyler Robinson only 11 days after her own husband was murdered by the Mormon has been controversial. And so it has led me to ponder on when we should forgive people. Obviously, it's up to us, isn't it? We were wronged, and we choose to forgive or not forgive. We may have pressure put on us to forgive some wrong, particularly if it's made by somebody important to us, our parents, our spouse, and sometimes we actually have to forgive them for our own sakes, without them even realizing that they've done any wrong or expressing any kind of remorse, and most probably they'll do it again. And I suppose we need to somehow explain to ourselves why we're doing this. Should we forgive people who didn't even ask for it, uh, when you know they're going to do it again? But if you don't, you will be boiling in a state of permanent resentment and hatred. And I was going to say that for the people who forgive terrible wrongs against them, such as the killing of their loved ones by terrorists, uh, I imagine they justify it to themselves by saying, hey, God will punish them, so I don't have to lust after revenge on them. And B, if I lust after revenge on them, I won't be able to sleep easily at night. I will be in a state of permanent rage. So perhaps it would be easier for me to just forgive whatever terrible outrage it was that was done to you. Um, I suppose the next question would be, how would you feel if you were the one murdered and you had an afterlife and you realised that your widow had forgiven your killer 11 days later? Might you not feel a little bit offended? So that is another question, and I suppose you, as the victim of murder, might decide not to forgive the person. But then, who has a right to forgive? Um, I know that Jews and Muslims look askance at Christians with their practice of um, absolution. I know not all Christians believe that. I know the Calvinists don't agree. So with the Catholic Church, the Catholic priest has this right to absolve a sinner from his sins by prescribing a punishment, 10 Hail Marys, um, giving to charity, or whatever it is that they decide. And you think, but what about the victim? Has the victim been compensated? And we know that Jews have a very developed system of tshuva, which says that remorse is a four-stage process. I think the order is, you stop, doing the thing that you know to be wrong, you confess that you have done wrong. Thirdly, you, you say you're never going to do it again. And fourthly, you make amends. So this 4-stage process means that you're not just going to forget about it, right? Because it is a bit embarrassing, right? You stop and then you confess, and then you say you'll never do it again. So people will know you made a mistake, and people will know you said you're gonna not do it again, and then you'll have to put things right again. So you're not just going to forget about it the way so many people, forget about their mistakes and then commit them again, not very long afterwards. So thank you, Yoa, for gently reminding me that it is the fasting of Yom Kippur has begun. And Yoav also says that the sinner must first express remorse. But then what about the sins that we sort of know are going to be committed again, that are um, not even acknowledged? I suppose we would have to imagine ourselves in a divine court of law, and eventually, logically, we're just going to go back to what would the being that is absolutely correct and knows absolutely everything, what would he think about the subject? And it's, again, we leave it up to God if we're not certain. And I suppose we would have to ask ourselves, well, would God forgive Tyler Robinson for killing Charlie Kirk? And I am reminded of a recent murder by a former Christian called Adam Schiff, and he killed a pastor, I think, or a Catholic priest, I forget now. But so basically he was going to kill 14 of them. He had a list. I think they were all in Arizona, and he said the reason was that these priests were breaking the first and second commandments and therefore deserve to die. And it does indeed say in the Torah that idolatry and blasphemy attract the death penalty, and Jews will, I'm sure, confirm that Maimonides, in his wisdom, has discovered 36 capital offenses in the Torah, and they include idolatry and blasphemy. And Christian practice has been to burn heretics at the stake for blasphemy. So, it's a well-established fact that once upon a time, when Jews and Christians took their religion seriously, they would execute idolaters and blasphemers. Unfortunately, there came along the Quran that actually does not mention blasphemy, actually says God does not require humans to protect his hurt feelings. And this is confirmed by chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, that says, there is no compulsion in belief, truth stands clear from error, and there is nothing in the Quran that prescribes any punishment for blasphemy. So this is something to remember. I do despair of Muslims ever taking this point, because most of them are ignorant and confused. But just to be clear, it was actually a Pakistani who told me that, a Pakistani Islamic scholar told me that the Quran does not mention blasphemy at all. And my response to him was that there seems to be quite a few Pakistanis being executed for blasphemy in Pakistan. And he said, oh, that's nothing to do with Islam. That's to do with the British government, the British imperialists putting in place our blasphemy laws to impose their rule on us, and probably for the sake of public order. So this is a situation. But I would have thought if Muslims were being focused, directed, and organized, they could easily say that God, or well, in particular Allah, in the Quran, does not prescribe any punishment at all for saying rude things about God. And this obviously supports the First Amendment. But we also know that even in atheist countries, there are certain speeches that are criminal, such as inciting a crime, defamation, and now hate speech, which really came out of nowhere. There is no act of parliament in the UK called the Hate Speech Act or anything like that. It's really been a recent development, created out of thin air, really, and I suppose those who would argue in favour of it would be to say that the internet is a public place. But then I would also say that the internet is not a direct threat to public order, because somebody listening to whatever hate speech cannot immediately do anything about it. And when we talk about public order, we are talking about assemblies of men, unruly assemblies who might start a riot and go on a rampage. And of course, if we're just sitting in our own homes, or in a cafe and Starbucks, listening, scrolling through our phones or using our laptops, there is no immediate danger to public order. So I would put it to the government that they created hate speech out of nowhere, and I don't think any lawyer can, certainly in the UK, can say that there is any act of parliament that says people go to jail for Facebook posts, etc. But anyway, because Parliament has a right to abolish, repeal, or pass any law it likes, I suppose at a pinch they can pass the Hate Speech Act and say, right, if you're going to be saying this sort of thing, you're going to jail for 7 years, 10 years, 14 years, for life, whatever. There's nothing actually to prevent the British Parliament from doing anything like that. So, on the question of forgiveness, do we forgive our corrupt and incompetent ruling classes? And what happens if we say we don't forgive them? They will, uh, I think, dig their heels in and use more censorship and repressive measures, because I guess they would be afraid of us not forgiving them. So I think what is necessary to be done is to show that we have some understanding of how they became so corrupt and incompetent and so morally, sexually, and intellectually corrupt that they now lie to themselves. Do they really know who they are, what they're supposed to be doing, who they take orders from? I don't think they do. But if we subscribe to the moral system of the Abrahamic God, we will already know that one of the attributes of God is that he is forgiving, but only if you express remorse and promise never to do it again and really mean it. So I guess on the question of Charlie Kirk's killing, if we are to take the Torah seriously, then as a Christian, he would be considered an idolater and blasphemer, attracting the death penalty. But then so would Tyler Robinson, who's a Mormon, and Mormons are a category of Christian, and I guess he would have to suffer eternal damnation for the killing of Charlie Kirk. Let's imagine him feeling remorse, expressing it, and wishing to be forgiven. Would it be enough for Tyler Robinson to say, "I'm sorry, I killed Charlie Kirk. I won't do it again"? I would put it to you that that would be insufficient, because the only way to really show that he's not going to do it again would be to convert to Islam, and then not that he would escape, any penalty uh, that his killing attracted, because the death penalty operates in, I'm trying to remember which, in Utah. Yes, it does operate in Utah. So I'm certainly not arguing for him not suffering the full penalty of the law if he is found guilty. But for religious people, they have an extra dimension. It's sort of like, yeah, you may be executed in this life, but in the next life, you will arrive in heaven. It's that sort of thing. So I guess let's imagine a situation where Tyler Robinson is found guilty of the murder of Charlie Kirk and is sentenced to death and is indeed executed. But before he dies, he converts to Islam. Then I think, in theory, he has the he could be, well, he could go to heaven. I think that's how the ultra-Orthodox rabbis think. Because as far as the world is concerned, he was punished by being executed, and the rest is up to God. And if he is indeed worshipping the right God by converting to Islam and no longer being an idolater and blasphemer, found guilty of killing another idolater and blasphemer, then I guess Tyler Robinson would go to heaven. Because the idea, I think, is, this born again, it is not confined only to Christians. Muslims say, well, your sins that you committed before you converted to Islam would be forgiven. And I think it's logical to think like that, because obviously, by taking the very significant step of changing your religion, it is a public act, and it wouldn't be fair to say, but all the sins you committed while you didn't know any better will still follow you. So I guess that would make sense. But that is not to say that the penalty of the law would not still apply to you. For example, if you stole and you're in jail, but you choose to make a prison conversion to Islam. I'm not sure what the Jewish view is. What if Tyler Robinson converted to Judaism? Do Jews say that? Do they have this sort of born again, wipe the slate clean kind of thing? I think it's a bit dubious, because well, his conversion might not be accepted, right? You know, like Jews have a bad enough reputation already without welcoming, murderers of Christians into their ranks. So that probably wouldn't happen. They might say, well, if you're going to be a no-hide, okay, but um, I suppose that could be done in that way, and then uh, and then I suppose. Um, to make sure that Tyler Robinson renounced Mormonism as idolatry. But the thing is, wasn't he already a heretic? Did he? What is a Mormon? Is Tyler Robinson a Mormon heretic? So we have to be so careful about all these things because that person may be officially this religion or that religion. But, did he do the terrible thing he did because he was a member of that religion or because he fell out of it? The thing is, we won't really know why he did it until his trial because it's only then that, he's going to be asked these questions like, Tyler Robinson, why did you kill Charlie Kirk? You know, and then we can decide whether he's telling the truth or not. But there seems to me to be a kind of religious war brewing with Adam Schiff, who who came from a middle class white Christian family, and then he just got it into his head that Christians, just by being Christian, broke the first and second commandments. And I guess the silver lining of that is that it may move Americans quicker towards Sharia than not, I guess. So, Yoa, I don't know if you'd like to join me, um, because I think I basically said what I want to say, and um, yes, I think I've said some people forgive, just to give themselves peace of mind. Because if you don't forgive, if you're permanently angry at somebody, you will um, be making a bed of nails for yourself, I guess. Um, but yes, I mean, people are kind of put in an awkward position. Shall I forgive this outrage, um, or not? And I think eventually, as time passes, it becomes clear. Maybe you're not that outraged anymore. A week later, a year later, and eventually you'll forget that you were ever angry about whatever that person did. But obviously, we should seek forgiveness for our sins, and obviously we need to uh, decide for ourselves what is right and what is wrong. And I guess anyone who has ever complained about the behavior of anyone else must bear in mind that their own behavior is not perfect either. Yoav says, I've said all I can say in public. Well, you know, I think all these problems in the West is because it's because Jews are not fit for the purpose for which God made them as chosen people. Okay, so this is my theory. Okay, God exists, right? Supposing God exists, you know, and we know from the story of the Torah. There was Adam and Eve, and then there was Noah, and the Jews have said, well, even in the times of Noah, the Gentiles sort of knew what they were supposed to do, but they didn't do it, and they sinned. They sinned so terribly that God got so angry with them that He was going to wipe them off the face of this earth. And you think, well, why didn't they just stick to the rules? And I think the reason was because they hadn't discovered writing yet. So they all had this very defective oral tradition, and so they didn't really take it seriously. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. So we know the story of Noah. He was saved with his ark and everything, and time passed, and then Abraham came along, and he thought, um, I need to smash those idols. I really need to smash those idols, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to smash Dad's idols, and show him what's what and who's who. And he did, and he got away with it. And then I think he went to Sodom and Gomorrah to tell of the Sodomites, um, and then I guess he realized that they weren't all bad, and he actually pleaded to God and say, well, don't kill all of them. They're not all bad. And God said, how many of them aren't all bad? And I think it was, well, 100 of them, and Abraham looked a bit uncertain, 50, and got to 10, and Abraham still looked very uncertain, and from that moment on, the goose of the Sodomites in Gomorrah were cooked. Not even 10, not even enough to form a minyan, so they had to go. So that's a story. So if we have 10 decent, moral, honourable people, we might yet be saved. And you think the Americans run a global empire. You think they might be able to find as many as 10. But it seems not. Now, I haven't finished. I guess I'm making the point that it's the idolatry that takes people off the right path. Because if you don't have a book of rules that you follow, then sadly for you, your corrupt and incompetent ruling classes will make up the rules as they go along, and you will always be at the wrong end of the stick where that is concerned, because your ruling classes, when they make up laws, will make up laws to suit them. And we are all familiar with the saying, one rule for the rich and another for the poor. And even if it's all the same, the rich have access to better legal representation. So how can we ensure that our ruling classes are not corrupt and incompetent? And what I've been trying to say is that it's not that hard. All you have to do is make sure that people who tell lies, people who can't follow logic, will not be considered, well, they'll obviously not be considered honest and rational, and therefore they shouldn't get into positions of government. And therefore, we, just by getting everybody to police each other for the telling of lies and the inability to follow logical arguments, we can just turn this whole thing around by telling others off, like, what you say, it's not true. And with AI, I think it's really quite easy. We have the internet, we have AI to say, is such and such true or not, and we have a range of AI. It's really not that hard. So so if you don't like what somebody is saying, you can undermine it by proving that their argument is based on a false premise, and then you can show that their argument is illogical. And if they get upset and start crying, you can tell them off for being effeminate if they're men, and not worth talking to if they're women. They just get upset and they can't, argue their way out of a paper bag except to, call you names, and too upset and hysterical to formulate arguments. It's like, well, you're easily upset. Civil and rational political discourse is not for you, lady. So why don't you go back to the kitchen if you're not able to follow um, reasoning based on logic? So here are two ways of dealing with the irrational and dishonest in your society. And we all know we're surrounded by dishonest and irrational people who lie not just to others, but to themselves. And sadly, they're not all atheists, because look, if you look at how these belief systems are constructed, um, you can see that if you want to be a member of a religious group, you have to pretend you have to pretend. If you Okay, this doesn't include secular Jews, but if you want to be a rabbi, you have to say you believe in God, don't you? I mean, I've heard stories about, even rabbis these days don't believe in God. But okay, let's go one level up. If you're going to be Haredi, you have to believe in God. You can't say, "Oh, I'm an atheist, Haredi. I don't believe in God, but I'm an ultra Orthodox Jew," because you'd be kicked out for being mad and silly. So at some point, you will be required to believe in certain things in order to be part of that group. So I mean, it would be like a Muslim saying. I don't believe in Allah, but I'm Muslim, and he'll be kicked out of the group for his heresy. And it's the same with Christians. If you're going to call yourself a Christian, Jesus has to be, somehow in your belief system. So, um, with the Abrahamic religions, they all came to worship the Abrahamic God, and nobody, as far as I know, is saying the Torah ain't true. Well, not if you're, claiming to be a believing Jew, Christian, or Muslim. I mean, that's why Christians and Muslims cannot deny the Torah, because the Torah is the foundation of their own religion. So that's why they cannot ever deny the Torah. And we know what the Christians did. They culturally appropriated the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and then they on their New Testament onto it and say Jesus is God. Sadly for the Jews, they couldn't do anything about it, right? They're only very few, and I guess they had to pretend that it wasn't happening or that it didn't affect them. Um, I mean, I really think Christianity would be the religion of Amalek if they still exist, because Christianity is basically the antithesis of Judaism. So while Judaism says do not worship idols, do not even conceive of God as anything physical, what do the Christians do? They go and find a Jew to worship as a co-equal of God. So that is clearly blasphemy to Jews, but being only 1% of the population, I guess they were helpless to do anything, and maybe a lot of them were settled in Europe, which is Christendom, and they didn't fancy moving away. And I guess at the time, Christendom was all right. It was when it was getting powerful and with their Western imperialism and their Western banking system, there was a lot of money to be made. And I guess the Jews were happy to stay where they were, and they didn't want to move back to Israel, where, well, I guess there wasn't that much there for them. So, and I guess they thought, well, perhaps it doesn't matter, this living with all these idolaters. Maybe they're all right, and maybe they're all right to do business with, and maybe we can accept their oaths. And And I guess over the centuries, they accustomed themselves to the idea of living with the idolaters and even marrying them from time to time. But um, there is the sin of nidakat, which is becoming a citizen of a city that has gone astray. And obviously, all the cities of Christendom were cities that have gone astray. So I don't think these Jews, well, if God exists, would have got themselves into heaven. Um, and so the Jews were really not really fit for the purpose of telling Christians what they thought of their religion. And I think God, in his mercy, sent Muslims as their auxiliaries. So it's sort of like, well, Jews, you're just not up to the job. We're going to send you some Gentile helpers to get your message through to the Christians, and I'm gonna put in the Quran, chapter 18, verse 4, that commands these Muslims to admonish those who claim that God has begotten a son. That'll do it, right? But did the Muslims do it? I don't think so. They certainly didn't do it. After the lifetime of Muhammad, I know Muhammad, wrote a few letters to leaders and inviting them to Islam, and I think he might have invaded one or two of these countries when they didn't convert. But anyway, over the centuries, Muslims sort of didn't really obey, if they ever did. Chapter 18, verse 4, that commands them to admonish those who claim that God has begotten a son. They never really did it. And you could imagine that they did suffer punishment, from the Crusades, because they didn't care about the Europeans, drowning in their idolatry, and then when they became imperialistic, they came over to the Levant to slaughter Jews and Muslims, and that might be the reason. It's like if you don't do what you're supposed to do, then obviously if God exists and punishes disobedience, and there's quite a horrible um, list of punishments under in chapter 28 of the book of Deuteronomy, listing the horrible punishments for disobedience. So I think we can kind of understand what this moral system is supposed to encourage, which is to explain to idolaters that they are paying a very high price for not being rightly guided by the Quran. And I'm saying, as an amateur historian, that it's actually very easy for me to attribute any historical tragedy to not being rightly guided by the Quran. And this is the argument that I hope Muslims will use, if indeed they understand anything of what I'm saying at all. All right. Thank you, Yard, for your comments. I will what you saying? What really happened? What have they dug up in Jordan? Okay, that's the trouble with some posts in the live chat. So Yoav Brexler says Tyler Robinson did not pass the test. Oh, being Jewish, I suppose. So, I mean, not that I don't think his conversion would even be accepted and no rabbi would undertake, or no Jewish community would undertake to um, let him, um, uh, well, to even entertain the idea. So it's not going to happen. Yoav says there are ultra-Orthodox Jews who keep their disbelief in the closet and live the lie for the sake of the children. Yes, I readily accept this because people are just loyal to their uh, group identity, and they may not even believe in it. I think most people are like that. It's the religion of mum and dad, and if I reject the religion of mum and dad, there will be consequences. Um, and they're probably to do with inheritance and sibling rivalry and family relations. So they're just going to pretend to believe, and this I think is really the problem. And also most people probably think, well, who knows? Who knows what religion is right? Look at this group. There's so many of them, and they're so ancient. And look at that group. I wouldn't like to live their life. So we're just better not to disrespect the religion of mum and dad and stay within the fold and get on with my family and members of the community. But so that's how they think. And this presumably is how these ultra-Orthodox Jews who don't believe in God think. They somehow feel they have to continue the tradition because it would be too disgraceful to let their children become liberal, right, and assimilate, and maybe they think being Jewish is I've said this before, being the aristocracy of humanity, because Jews have this reputation of being God's chosen people, but they are by no means the only people who have claimed this title. But they are the most famous of all of the people who claim to be God's chosen people. I did not Jacob teach you that we do not consider them idolaters? Well, Jacob, this is Jacob Fartarecci, who has a YouTube channel called Fartarecci. He says, well, no, okay, he and I argue about how to treat Christians, and I know he loves to, be with his Christian friends, and I just I just say to him, how can you stand to even talk to them? They are such a bunch of retards. How can you even be nice to them because they're so mendacious and degenerate and just talking nonsense the whole time and just looking, um, very unattractive. There's nothing more unattractive than men talking nonsense to comfort themselves. So, that's what I really think of them. And yeah, yes, I understand that Jacob wants to be friendly with them, and I think sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind, right? The West needs a religion to hold its ruling classes accountable. So it's like you're born, you're expected to play a game, right? So don't you think you have a right to ask, excuse me, what's the name of the game? And then what's the object of the game? And what's the rules of the game? So that you don't lose the game. Obviously, you need to know what the rules of the game and what you're supposed to do. So this is what I'm saying people need to do. Obviously we never asked to be born, but having been born and, having become adults with all kinds of, responsibilities that we're supposed to have, we need to know why we're here, what we're supposed to be doing, and what's within the rules and what isn't. And we also need to hold our leaders accountable, and be able to, at some point, say, hey, you're not supposed to be doing that. It's against the rules. And if you don't have rules, then you can never say that to them. So, an example that comes to mind in America was um, when the Democrats tried to trash the reputation of Judge Kavanaugh. So they found this woman, what's her name, Christine Blasey Ford or something like that, who alleged that 20 years ago Judge Kavanaugh uh, indecently assaulted her or something. And I thought, this is so ridiculous. How can it be possibly proven? And it was so obviously political. But the whole thing went ahead. Judge Kavanaugh was eventually appointed, but he was subject to a ritual humiliation. Um, but the point is that if the Americans had taken the book of, is it the book of Isaiah? I forget which book it was anyway, but it says you should not take the word of one witness seriously. You must require uh, corroborating testimony, two or three, and maybe some form of evidence. And if the Americans had taken any of this seriously, it would have been thrown out of court, and Christine Blasey Ford would have been told to go jump in the lake because she couldn't prove anything about what happened 20 years ago anyway. And so these rules, I think, are function as safety rails for all of us, and they make sense and protect our rights. So why don't we use them? It's so stupid not to use them. Right. There's some comments by you, but I'm not sure what they mean. Um, But before I go, let me sum up what I thought I said. If we seek forgiveness, it should be from our victim. And I don't think anyone but God has the right to forgive the perpetrator on behalf of the victim. If the victim does not choose to forgive. But forgiveness is also a way of drawing a line onto something that you don't want to think about anymore because you don't see any profit in it, and that is why you think by forgiving you will forget the outrage perpetrated on you and move on with your life. But in the case of Mrs. Charlie Kirk, I think a lot of people thought it was um, presumptuous of her to think that her own husband would have been at one with her on the question of forgiving his assassin 11 days after he was assassinated. And the feeling was that it was inappropriate and made Christians look weak. But then I'm saying Christians do look weak, and people thinking of remaining Christian should have a think about a more rational and moral religion. And, and that's all I have to say. Thank you, Yoa, for coming. And um, I can't say a happy Yom Kippur because it's not appropriate. I don't think I'm supposed to say a happy, what was it? a happy Tisha B'Av. But anyway, I hope you enjoy your festival, and I must say I quite enjoyed it when I spent it with a friend of mine. The fasting for 25 hours, the breaking of the fast, and the ritual of asking for forgiveness. And obviously you have to give it, right? You can't say it's about time. You um, you ask for forgiveness because the asking for of it is kind of vague and general and ritualistic and perhaps insincere. You say, "May you be written in the book of the living." Uh, is there a book of the dead? I don't quite. Okay, I'm going to look it up because I actually did, but I've forgotten. But yes, I'll certainly do something more on the subject of forgiveness and atonement before it is over. Thank you for coming and thank you for listening.